presentation this morning comes from a recent article in the UU magazine. There are two paragraphs from the presentation called Why We're Ready for Radical Change by Naomi Klein. Dr. Klein was the lead speaker for this year's Unitarian Universalist Association's annual meeting. She is a professor at Rutgers University, author, filmmaker, and activist. And Dr. Klein says, quote, "This particular moment in human history is utterly extraordinary. A global pandemic is tearing through a planet with 7.8 billion people living more interconnected lives than ever before. But that's not the only extraordinary thing happening. Massive and inspiring uprisings in defense of Black life are sweeping the same planet, reaching far beyond the United States where they began. And all of this is taking place at the precise moment that the clock is striking midnight on the climate crisis. How close to midnight? Well, on June 20th, a Siberian town 70 miles north of the Arctic Circle hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's more than 30 degrees warmer than average. One more grim, broken record. Some say we are living in the age of consequences." End quote. Dr. Klein's words recalled for me a saying that is credited to Albert Einstein, and it says, "We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them." Today's talk is an introduction to some remarkable ideas that have been floating around for decades and are just now becoming understood on a mass scale. We are much more than we've ever imagined. UU's resident statistician, Chuck Morgret, last week gave us an excellent overview of current implications of the pandemic. And Chuck's excellent calculations are indeed sobering for us all. I take today into a wider discussion of a possible solution for our crises. Einstein's level of thinking comment spurred me to explore the question, what if we do have a second source of knowledge that's already built into us, that's better than brain thinking? If true, then do we have an unused tool to address our crises? Information I present today may stretch your mind a little bit, or it may make perfect sense. We need to begin to think of ourselves differently. This higher knowledge is present, and it does grab our attention sometimes. Notable people even point out that knowledge for us. For example, astronaut Edgar Mitchell said, "What I experienced during that 3-day trip to the moon was nothing short of an overwhelming sense of human consciousness." Dr. Mitchell tapped into that higher knowledge. In fact, many astronauts since Mitchell's trip have experienced epiphanies, and they comment that from space, no one sees national boundaries. There is only land, sea, and a fragile planet. To understand that we have different thinking, here's another worldview of different thinking that did not become mainstream reality. An old Native American proverb says, "Listen to the wind, it talks. Listen to the silence, it speaks. Listen to your heart, it knows." American tribes from the Iroquois to the Hopi to the Eskimo, Alaskans always say Inuit, have long viewed many white man ways as crazy. First Nation people have always recognized their interconnectedness to nature, unlike cultures that see the world divided into separate bits like self and other, male and female, wild and tame, mine and yours, sacred and profane, plant and animal, human and nature. John Fire Langdeer was a 20th century Lakota holy man who said, quote, "We know that being a part of the earth, we cannot harm any part of her without hurting ourselves." There's been scant understanding among most of the world that everything is interconnected, and to designate much of our world into inferior and superior bits is to throw the world out of balance. And we've been doing that for centuries. Mother Earth prefers the balanced, natural way of things. Again, my second quote from Dr. Naomi Klein. Quote, "Will we do the hard work that is necessary to make amends, to repair relations, to set things right, to begin to heal?
When you guys
Or
get a chance, can you
will
empty
we
the
keep
dishwasher,
pretending
please?
that there is time to spare even as the fires lick our doorsteps?" So much hangs in the balance of what we, the people who happen to be alive at this very moment, do or fail to do right now. In these immediate days, weeks, months, and a handful of years. I know that's heavy, but it's also true that a staggering number of people now grasp the scale of our interlocking crises. Small tweaks to our system are not going to get us to safety, not just ecologically, not just socially, and not just politically. We, who long for a different kind of society, are many. Like we who are rooted in the respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, as Unitarians so wisely put it in your seventh principle. Dr. Klein's statement makes me very grateful for being a part of our Tullahoma Unitarian community who support and believe in the seven principles. With open minds, you are a sign of hope and support to me in this mixed up world. The shot heard around the world has been the COVID-19 virus. Pause from business as usual has been given to us by way of the virus, and it makes us see problems that have long been ignored. We really do need a different way of solving our problems besides the same brain thinking that keeps creating them. Albert Einstein warned us. He said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." So, what are we to make of Einstein's words? What does he mean when he says intuitive mind and needing better thinking? And are we indeed in the midst of something like a paradigm shift that very imaginative man could imagine? Another thing to rattle our nerves is that we have come to a unique situation in history, and that offers no models from the past. Besides being the first generation that is able to destroy our Earth home, ours is the first generation to have the capacity to use higher knowledge on a very large worldwide scale to return us to a balanced world. As of this generation, as Dr. Klein says, we, the people who happen to be alive at this very moment, are privy to wider possibilities for humankind and begin to understand that the concept of being in this together means something far different. End quote. Eckhart Tolle is a contemporary German philosopher, and he may be speaking literally when he very playfully says, "Knowing yourself is to be rooted in being instead of lost in your mind." Instead of that beingness, we keep using brain thinking about 70 to 90% of the time, just like our ancestors did. There's been no framework for understanding the idea of a better knowledge. Without understanding how important it is to access such powerful and efficient information, we keep repeating the same problems that keep us in an unbalanced world. For the rest of the talk now, I will use the word consciousness instead of higher knowledge, though it has many names like intuition or being authentic or beingness. It took the work of a brilliant quantum scientist in the 20th century to point us all toward a much better future. Dr. David Bohm, and that's spelled B-O-H-M, was universally recognized as an American quantum physicist and who died in 1992. He is described as one of the most significant theoretical physicists of the 20th century. He contributed unorthodox ideas to quantum theory, neuropsychology, and the philosophy of mind. His calculations even made the atomic bomb possible, though he was a very unwitting partner. J. Robert Oppenheimer was Bohm's advisor at the University of California. And for those of you who may not know who Oppenheimer was, he is the lead scientist credited with making the atomic bomb work. Oppenheimer stole Bohm's PhD thesis, and he took it to Los Alamos to use in testing the bomb. It was considered such important information in New Mexico by the official government that they classified it immediately as top secret, and it disappeared forever. Gentle-natured Bohm was working at the end of his life on a very humanitarian, far-reaching theory to benefit mankind. Bohm referred to his work as a search for wholeness, spelled W-H-O-L-E-N-E-S-S, wholeness. With correct equations and using the latest scientific knowledge available in the 1990s, Bohm arrived at his theory in stages. He came to this wholeness in part due to a boycott of his ideas by the scientific community. Throughout the 1950s, scientists were unable to refute or find any flaws in his unusual new work that challenged the status quo. Instigated by Oppenheimer, all of the scientists isolated Bohm. They stayed totally silent about his work, probably because it threatened a worldview that has existed for a long time. Thus, decades of important research went unnoticed. Bohm left the United States finally in the 1950s, and after living in several different countries, he finally became an English citizen for the rest of his life. All that time, he was searching for a way to further explore his ideas outside of science. His quest brought him to a very unexpected source: spirituality. Bohm began extensive exploration into spirituality after happening upon a book with a discussion that paralleled his work, but it was in spiritual language. He was a very perseverant kind of man. For the next 25 years, he had extended discussions with the best contemporary minds in spirituality, just like he had with Albert Einstein about scientific possibilities when he was a young man. Einstein called David Bohm his spiritual son. And in later years, the Dalai Lama said that Bohm was his guru. And the Dalai Lama also said, "I am so grateful to him," in reference to Bohm's work in opening up the world's mind. David Bohm came to understand that wholeness has been discussed in spiritual literature as far back as the beginning of recorded history. In ancient writings, one giant, all-encompassing mind was understood, and it was even explained in spiritual terms. This caused Bohm to rethink the nature of reality, and it led to a novel idea that humans just might have infinite potential. Maya Angelou was a poet and American philosopher, and she once said, "If you are always trying to be normal, you will never know how amazing you can be." So, amazingly, David Bohm did integrate two very different worldviews, science and spirituality. His calculations have vastly expanded the field of quantum science. He came to believe that thought from our brain might not be humankind's most powerful way of learning. So he explored the workings of the brain. From there, he began to understand that the brain has different functions than most people currently believed. He eventually nicknamed brain thought as, quote, ego mind, because he came to see brain knowledge is a secondary kind of knowledge. To Dr. Bohm, ego mind in the brain is more like a memory storage device that runs very sophisticated programs. Bohm deduced, though, that there must be some kind of knowledge without words or language that might be responsible for existence. In looking for the mechanism of how we receive operating knowledge, he was led to explore consciousness. In time, he learned that humans, in fact, are energy beings who are having a human experience, and we energy beings are directing the brain. All of us use consciousness, that other kind of knowledge, when you've heard your gut, or had a powerful dream, or listened to your heart, or suddenly gotten an inspiration, or had an accurate intuition before something happened, or know who's on the phone before you answer it. In those cases, you've used your consciousness. It's often present in a crisis or a moment of joy. It is always instantaneous, and it's accurate. Research into consciousness today is blossoming among all kinds of different scientific disciplines. There are hundreds of papers and videos and experiments and books, etc., on consciousness that explain many aspects of consciousness research very well to we lay reading public. Books with catchy titles like Becoming Supernatural, or The Divine Matrix, or The Biology of Belief. All of those are written by scientists. In consciousness, we do have an information vehicle that doesn't follow the same rules that brain thinking requires. It does, however, contain perhaps limitless knowledge that we can use. Consciousness is a quantum, not a relative kind of information. Here are some things that scientists do know today about the strange world of consciousness. Point: consciousness is not in a human organ or even found anywhere in the body. Point: consciousness directly affects matter. Point: the human body uses this knowledge constantly. Point: the heart has about 40,000 brain-like cells that regularly send consciousness information to the brain. Point: consciousness is a universal energy or plasma field. and it's constantly folding and infolding possible information. Bohm referred to that as implicate and explicate order. Consciousness does not negotiate, it's accurate, and it is not affected by time or space. Another point, no thinking is required to understand consciousness information. And lastly, consciousness seeks balance and it permeates everything, you included. So what's the difference between these two kinds of knowledge, the ego brain and the consciousness? Well, the brain operates by way of relativity rules. Every cause matches up to a specific local effect, and the brain operates within our three-dimensional world. The brain gives answers based on everything you continually learn. It does not create experiences, but it is very good at endlessly combining relevant information in order to interpret our world and care for our body and to give an answer. In fact, the brain may give many different answers sometimes to a single problem, and that's not always helpful. When thinking, all information is scanned for pattern recognition and answers result with almost within all near instant moments. The brain stores everything, including emotions, and it keeps old knowledge in an unconscious way away from our awake mind. Unconscious old thinking has emotions stored along with the memories. If an old memory was scary, sad, or unpleasant, it's stored with that memory. Often, when one makes a decision that they think rational, it may well have old memories included below one's awareness that affects the decision making. So the ego brain operates only on what it has learned, including emotions. Learned emotions like fear, denial, lack, anger, helplessness, and greed have created a world out of balance, Bohm called it non-resonant, for a long time. Unlike the ego brain, the consciousness exists in a quantum world, which is beyond our three-dimensional world. Consciousness only seeks balance, never imbalance. And it responds to feelings like joy, beauty, vulnerability, courage, sympathy, or imagination. These emotions produce resonance, not disharmony, in our world. From your consciousness's point of view, you are never a failure. You are just living in an environment where you are not being loved and supported. Since consciousness is a single oneness, in other words, one single all-encompassing field, what others do affect you, just as you also affect other people. Dr. John Hagelin is a quantum physicist of the 21st century, and he has popularized the name unified field for what David Bohm referred to as wholeness. Consciousness is the communicator between the unified field and every person. Dr. Bohm's work shows us that we are energy beings within a unified field who do have infinite potential. That is changing our relationship to the cosmos. A new dialogue is being born. The observational view of how we see everything is suddenly shattering as we begin to understand that we are the unified field creating our own world. This is a personal opinion here. I venture to say that we can scarce imagine what 2040 is going to look like for people. Our Earth needs balance, resonance, urgently. Again, as Chuck Morgret pointed out, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, we find ourselves in an ever accelerating cycle. So we need to grasp this awareness quickly. It is no time to be shy or lazy. Remember, it is only our generation that has finally achieved the capacity to enlighten enough people to be able to shift humanity into a higher order of thinking. So, what can we do right now? Carolyn Miss is a medical intuitive, and she says, quote, "You know better. It's time to stop feeling that the world owes you something. Every choice you make is an expression of power." It's time to stop being enchanted with negative emotions. Each of us, not somebody else, makes the choices of how to view our world. When people are continually negative or violent, they are themselves changed away from the purity of their purpose, and they create only disharmony in their lives. For those of us who want to return to pre-COVID days, sorry, they're gone. We are fast growing beyond ignorance of who we authentically are. Unlike the flora and fauna on Earth, most humans resist change. Human resilience in adjusting, though, is huge. We can change. We can turn toward each other. Change is a part of life. And sometimes change comes in a big leap, and this may be the biggest leap ever seen. It's our choice to not give in to confusion and fear. We must stop believing that the world is a negative place and that it is always a struggle to survive. Recognize that when your authentic self is communicating, it's your consciousness. And consciousness is in charge, not your ego brain. I quote Star Trek here: "Having natural order in the world is a prime directive." There are 11 things that I thought of that you guys can do right now. Number 1, take care of your own mental health first, not others. You being balanced will affect others. Number 2, stop the brain chatter. Dream, meditate, pray, daydream, or be still in nature. Whatever makes you feel still and quiet. As the Native Americans said, listen to the silence. It speaks. Consciousness can be accessed when you stop the ego thinking in your brain. Number 3, request inner voice help when you need it, listen to it, and then act on it. A little PS here, when you are requesting, don't ask for specifics like stuff. Ask for assistance or help with what's going on. Number 4, don't expect immediate results. The unified field creates. In other words, it has to set the field. Humans' job is to implement. Number 5, stay in the present. Be attentive to what's happening right now. Remembering past hurts or future problems is pointless. Number 6, instead of dwelling on troubles, be grateful for being here. That's something that Carrie Hawk said last Sunday when she was quoting her husband, John Lynch. Grateful means at least we've got hot water, a roof over our heads, and food to eat. Number 7, take ownership of your own feelings, and in so doing, do always accept yourself with unconditional caring. Number 8, when you do experience anger, sadness, or any negative emotions, acknowledge it, feel it briefly, and then release the negative emotion. Number 9, don't dwell on problems. When they arise, just let them slide on through you, because otherwise they get stuck in your body's nervous system and make you sick. Number 10, change how you see yourself and how you act in the world. Once you are settled into your authentic self, negative emotions will no longer cripple because your perspective changes. Unhelpful emotional reactions just become more information learned. And finally, do a kindness for a stranger frequently. Be hopeful, be compassionate, be non-judgmental. A bit of advice. Operating by way of consciousness is not hard. It doesn't have to be learned or convinced. Your consciousness was with you at your birth, and it will leave when you do. Remember, we are not here to learn how to have more than others, or build better widgets, or run faster. This planet is a place of learning, preferably in a resonant way. Even professionals agree. Dr. Nassim Haramein works at the Resonance Project Foundation in California, and he works with quantum vacuum engineering. His lifelong vision of applied unified physics is to create positive change in the world. He says that worldwide, the level of the awareness field is rising quickly. Here is a direct quote from Dr. Haramein. When the forces of nature can be used to access the flow of the unified field, there will be a shift in consciousness, and soon. There is a bright future within the next decade. It is close now. Don't despair. There is a solution, and we are very close to it. The important thing is to keep our eyes on harmony and let the rest go. The rest will sort itself out. End quote. Dr. Haramein encourages everyone to participate in this positive awareness field, this unified field, with our positive actions, because that speeds the process along. So, finally here, to conclude, higher knowledge has many names. Wider awareness, inner voice, authentic self, consciousness, intuition, wholeness, enlightened being, a unified field, a peaceful person. You are an energy field that thrives on harmony, is non-judgmental, and you respond to positive emotions, as well as being infinitely creative. You can take or leave what I've said today. Do remember, though, it's you who make all your choices. You may be living in the most extraordinary time in history. And I personally suspect it is no accident that you are here today. Our journey on earth is a brief one, so make the most of what you have. Mahatma Gandhi said it very succinctly. and the best. He said, in order to change the world, you must be the change you want to see in the world.